Thank you so much. I just got back from a trip to the Middle East, so if I appear a bit jet-lagged and so on, apologize for that. So I'm editor of this dental journal. The journal started in 1951, and in fact, the first editor was at Ohio State University. So when I became editor, it kind of came home. Hopefully, the information from the editor's side, you know, I've been an author too, so it's always, you always blame the journal when they say mean things about your article, and the journal we always blame the authors, you know, they're nothing but trouble. But obviously the authors are our customers, the readers are our customers, so we try to be nice for our authors, and they come from all over the world. So many of them, English is not the first language, so you know they have difficulties with language and so on. They never ever read the manual, you know, read the guide for authors. So that's our first beef with our authors, is that RTFM, you know, is what they say in technology, I think. If you have questions about the presentation, want more information, email works well. I don't do Facebook either, so don't try and contact me on. My wife does Facebook, and the journal's on Facebook, but I don't. So this is an overview of a presentation, and hopefully we'll be able to cover most of these points in the presentation. So the first thing when you're designing your research, you're plotting your career goals and so on, is to make sure that you're publishing in the correct journal for you. And this can be hugely problematic in today's world when there's journals kind of popping up almost on a monthly or daily basis. Some of these journals are just not proper academic journals. It's really just a website that's trying to get your money. So you've just got to be really careful that you know your field, you know which journals are valued. You know, sometimes the top journals in your field are very competitive. So, you know, the first article, second article, that might not go into Nature or into New England Journal of Medicine or wherever your goals are. You need to look at, you know, journals, other journals in your field. Our journal gets about 1,000 submissions a year, and we publish 200 and something. So, you know, 3 out of 4 manuscripts I've got to reject. You know, that's just the nature of the beast. So, this is, if you're not sure about a journal, if it looks, you know, this might be a suitable journal for your work, it's worth looking at this. This field is a prof, I think, at Indiana University, and for many years he's kind of gone into these, what he calls predatory journals, which are they're not proper journals. It's not just a waste. It's not, you know, if you submit, you'll pay money, so it'll cost you money, and you'll get your publication. But the publication looks false to people that are assessing your CV. So if you're interviewing for jobs, if you're, you know, going for promotion and tenure, and you've got something published and they're not sure about this journal, and then they look at the journal and it's a like pay-for-play journal, they won't think that you've been trapped. They may think that you're kind of trying to pad your CV, you know, in an inappropriate way. So just be really careful. First of all, which journal you publish on, particularly if you don't read it and you're not familiar with it. So this is the scary part about these predatory journals, is the number that have, you know, it's geometric pretty well in terms of how these things have popped up. And it's just, you know, you can start one if you want in your basement and get people's money, and, you know, it's a fraud, really. So just be very careful with where you publish and check these journals. So this is an email. You know, I updated my presentation, so I got this email day before, or Sunday, and it went to the spam folder, but I checked my, you know, the trash, and there it was. And this looks, and I actually haven't checked this journal. It might be a perfectly legitimate journal. It says the Journal of Oral Health and Craniofacial Science, so that in our field, that sounds interesting, and they're inviting me to be on the editorial board. You know, and again, they may click on something and, all right, now your name's on the editorial board, and then when you submit to this journal, you'll see a list of the editorial board, and these look prominent people, and that's, that's the fraud. This is just a spam thing to, I assume, to trap me. I haven't clicked on any links in this. Might be legitimate, but this is the sort of thing most of your faculty, most of the people in academics get these sort of emails all the time. So it's, you have been warned. Then when you decide where to publish, you want to consider, do you want a traditional journal or do you want an open access journal? Now, our journal, Journal of Prosthetic Dentistry, is a traditional journal. It can be open access if the author wants it to be open access, which means they pay an open access fee. But last year, we only had 2 articles published that were open access, and they were funded by a manufacturer. And the manufacturer, GSK, they wanted the information that was in those articles to be more widely disseminated, and they paid for open access. From impact factor and some of the, getting stuff read, it's not a bad idea to, have open access, because it's easier for your readership to get hold of those articles. For our serial, for our journal, which is published by Elsevier Company and also other big publishing companies, the January issue of most years is open access. And it's not, you may not realize that. So if you're looking kind of an example of this, if you're not that familiar, you don't subscribe to the journal, or maybe OSU doesn't get it as part of the library, look for the January issue, and you might be able to look at that. It's not behind a paywall. But the debate of traditional versus open access is really who pays. Publishing is not free. Someone has to pay. It's either the author who pays or the reader who pays, or advertising. And in our field, advertising is pretty small in an academic journal. The readership isn't big enough to satisfy the marketers. So the library, obviously, is the one who pays if we get our journals through OSU, and they, obviously like open access. If you're well-funded research, it probably isn't a problem to pay fees for open access. And some open access journals are really good. I mean, they, PLOS One and so on, these are top-notch journals in the field. However, just be careful of the open access that are not top-notch journals. They're just trying to get your money as authors. Typically, the fees around $3,000 an article. Now, other traditional articles may have fees. They may have fees for color reproduction. We don't charge any author fees. We used to for reprints, back when people wanted paper reprints, and I think we still offer that, but it's very rare that an author requests paper reprints. So just be careful. In our field, it's important that your research is read as well as published. And typically, the journals like ours are serialed in PubMed. So if you're doing a lit review for your thesis or your next project or what have you, PubMed is a starting point to see what's been published in that field. So if you're publishing in a journal that's not serialed in PubMed, you're kind of restricting the readership. And if you're restricting the readership, your work, your information is not going to be part of the scientific basis. So, that's you're going to get fewer citations and so on, and less people are going to know about your contribution in the field. So check the journals that you're interested in. If it's in the medical field, make sure it's in PubMed. So just as an example, it's a nice journal. It's well produced. It's got some good stuff. It's in a couple of languages because it's from Canada. So the Canadian Journal of Restorative Dentistry and Prosthodontics. However, it's not serialed in PubMed. So if I, take it, it's an interesting article to someone in the field over a long period of time, outcomes research. So, this is perhaps would be interested clinicians. But it'd be hard if you're not a subscriber to this journal to know that it exists. If you search for it under PubMed, so this is the title of the article. In fact, it'll turn up one of the Journal of Prosthetic Dentistry articles with similar phrasing, but you won't be able to find this non-PubMed article. So that's a concern, because when you do research, you obviously want that to be read. You have a readership that needs to know your information so that future studies can be planned appropriately. Things that you want to consider when you're choosing journals is some of the statistics of that journal that you're interested in that will be relevant to your career and how things get done. And an important statistic is how quickly is that journal going to respond to your submission. So time to decision, usually this is published. You can look this up for the journal you're interested in. The sooner the decision's made, then if it's a positive decision, that's great. If it's a negative decision, you can find another journal that wants your work. It's a little, all averages are misleading, as you know from science. And this one is a little misleading because a lot depends on what's the decision. If something is clearly outside the scope of my journal, I look at it, take a look, this isn't what we publish, that's called a desk reject. So I'll send a letter back to the author, probably within a day or 2 days. I try not to do it too fast, or the author thinks I haven't read his stuff carefully enough, so try. But that decision will be really fast. If something we are interested in, we're going to publish, we've got our peer reviewers to get in every database article with statistical questions about it, will go to a statistical consultant, then it'll go back to the author, then it'll come back to me, then there'll be more changes, and so on. And it goes through a process. So that article is going to take far longer than the one that gets rejected. So the more you kind of reject right away, your average time to decision is going to go down. So if you look at the very selective journals that you might want to publish in, they probably, only publish 1/10 of all the submissions that they get, and probably half of them they'll desk reject. So they're not even sent out to peer review. It's just not of that, what that particular journal is looking for. So just, statistics can be misleading, averages can be misleading. Probably the range is more interesting, in terms of how long is it going to take before this thing is going to get accepted. And, a lot depends. We blame the authors who never get stuff back to us. We blame the reviewers it's never the editor's fault. So this is what, I'm trying to cut this stuff down. This is one of the metrics that I'm judged on, in terms of being renewed as editor and being publishers being happy with me and the owners of the journal being happy with me. And we've achieved this, I think, mainly, so the average days between the manuscript being received and the first editor was assigned, has gone down tremendously. That's good. And then between the manuscript was received and the first reviewer invited, that's gone down. So our process has got more efficient over the last few years, and the first decision time has gone down. That's often delayed by a review if a review is needed. So this is kind of the things that owners of journals and publishers of journals are interested in, because their customer is you, authors. So they want, the feedback from the authors to be positive, and this is the sort of thing that they're definitely interested in. So journal metrics they'll be important in your career, in your dossier when you go for promotion or when you go for a job somewhere. And the most commonly used metric, it's really a bit bizarre to, in a lot of ways, is this impact factor. So impact factor is, for 2014, impact factor is A divided by B. So A is the number of times that articles published in that journal in just 2 years, 2012 and 2013, were cited by articles in index journals, and that's not all journals, it's just the ones that the owners of the impact factor index during 2014. And then B is the total number of articles published by that journal in 2012 and 2013. So in terms of, particularly I think in Europe, that they won't promote someone unless they have so many articles in higher impact factor journals. So if your journal doesn't have an impact factor at all, and it takes quite a long time before a new journal is, gets on to the list of index journals, that can be a problem. And then this impact factor can be a problem. So one of the things with these 2 years, 2012 and 2013, is there are going to be more citations for articles in 2012. There's also going to be more citations in articles published in January of 2012 than in December of 2012. So because they accumulate. So that's kind of why the January issue is open access, I think. That helps impact factor because more people read, more times that article's likely to be cited or possibility of being cited. If it's never read, it's never going to be cited. So, the thing is a little bit spurious in that regard. So in my particular journal, we managed to reduce our impact factor a little bit because we had a redesign of the journal. We wanted to make it more accessible, better, more attractive, better colors, different number of columns, the sort of thing that, to make a print journal more readable. So in order to do that, we had to get rid of a backlog. So most journals have a backlog of a number of months before an accepted online article goes into the print journal. And we didn't want to have to redesign all those backlogged articles, so we just published them all at the end of the year in rather thick issues. So then our 2012, or it was this year, I guess, so our 2013 was a normal year. 2014, the end of 2014, had many more articles. So that's going to drop that year's impact factor a little bit, which it did, and then I had to explain that to my bosses and so on. Next year it'll go up again, because they come at the end of the year. So this is impact factor. It is important. Look at that. It's not really the be-all and end-all of articles. So if you want to publish in a journal with a high impact factor, New England Journal of Medicine is the highest in the medical field, and Lancet and JAMA, so on. These are PLOS Med is an online journal. These are top, and the list is pretty well consistent with what people consider to be decent journals, so it's not totally ridiculous. And in dentistry, our journal on this list is 23rd on all of dental journals, so the highest is the Journal of Dental Research, which has got a 4 impact factor, and ours a 1.7. One of the reasons our journal will never be as high as the Journal of Dental Research is we publish a lot of clinical articles, because when you look at downloads, that kind of tells you what our readership is interested in, and they want clinical articles, techniques, things that will help them in their practice. Those articles don't get cited. So what gets cited are the review articles and the contemporary science articles. So we publish those, but we also publish quite a lot of technique and clinical articles, and they're the ones that get read, but they don't get cited, so that hurts us a little bit with our impact factor. So that's us there at the bottom. But there's, of 100, we're not really at the bottom, we're top quarter. Okay, so this shows the impact factor going up for our journal. Proud of this. And last year we were the highest of all our competing journals, and at one time we were kind of the lowest of all the competing journals. So I guess that's my doing now. I think not. This year dropped down a bit. So I haven't updated the graph. Can't imagine why. So we put our impact factor on the front of our journal, and this year I've taken it off, but I'll probably put it back. So it's 1.5, so 1%. So another metric which I see increasingly used is like an individual's impact factor. I mean, it can be used for journals, but it's more often seen for individuals. So if you have N papers that have at least H citations, then your H index would be H. So the number of papers with N or more citations is your H index. So that kind of says what your articles have, how much your articles have influenced the field. So you can look this up on Scopus, which is Elsevier's kind of platform, or other platforms, and see where you are. So I looked myself up, and I guess my H index is 24. So I don't know if that's good or not good, but I've had 24 articles, and I'm really old, so some of these articles go back a long time. And then one of these has had 226 citations, which is a review article, they're the ones, and another one 107, but they go down from there. So that if I'm competing for a job with someone else and their H index is 22, then they'll pick me because my work gets cited more. But journals also have a H index. What I like about this index is that it tells you which articles, what are the citations for that article. So I can go back to look at these 226 citations, and I can click on the link, and it actually shows those articles. That is really hard to get with impact factor, to know how Thomson Reuters, which is the owner of impact factor, actually comes up with that number. People, in Elsevier, they kind of have experts that I talk to make sure I'm not too stupid in terms of making sure I'm not killing our impact factor. But they don't know. They can't tell me what are the sites last year, list of the citations, and kind of look how I can look at those, or even the number of articles we've published. It just doesn't seem to correspond, to what we put out in terms of what they count as an article, what they don't count as an article, and so on. So in Google Scholar, if you go into Google Scholar and go under metrics, you can look in your field and look at the articles that have H5, which is a 5-year index of the. So if Nature has 379 articles in the last 5 years that had 379 or more citations, so that, and you can click on that 379, and it'll show you every single one of those articles and every single one of those citations. So that is kind of a good way of telling is that journal you're interested in a reliable, valid journal. So in dentistry, we come out pretty good at number 17. We have a H index of 35. So we have 35 articles in the last 5 years that have had 35 or more citations. And this, compares with the leading journal. And the list is pretty similar to the one for impact factor, but just it's a little easier to see, more. It's a little more open. So that's that journal. Okay, rule number 2, RTFM. Read the author guidelines. Just try to comply. We try to. The problem I have is if I get an article and it doesn't comply and the English is really bad, what should I do? If it looks like this might be interesting and I send it out for peer review, often the peer reviewers can't look beyond the English and they say, I can't review this, I just can't understand it. On the other hand, if I get it back to the authors, I say, fix the English, fix the, all the guidelines are not followed, and so on and so on, and they send it back, and it's still not right, and they go back a few times, and eventually it goes out for peer review, and the reviewers don't think it's, within our scope and so on. Then the authors think I've just messed them around. So you have a dilemma. What should you do with something that there might be something in there, but it's just hard to read, hard to, just doesn't fit into our guidelines. So look and make sure you read the manual. Length of manuscripts, I get tons of articles that are too long, and I'll send it back, but if they'd read the instructions, they wouldn't do it. Some journals have limitations on the number of authors. We kind of do, but we'll waive that with a justification. We want to see, a justification that each listed author qualifies as far as guidelines for authorship of an academic article. One thing that comes up from time to time, and it might have come up in one of your labs, is the late addition of an author to an accepted article. This is something we look at really, really carefully, because there have been kind of scandals that hit the press where people were selling authorships. So if I have an article that's been accepted in Nature, and I go, well, give me $500 and I'll add your name to this Nature journal, that's happened. And it was caught, and so quite often we get corrections, and the correction is we omitted one of our authors from the paper that we've accepted, and I'll go back and ask for a statement signed by all the authors that this is legitimate, and to do up my due diligence. But get the authorship sorted out right at the beginning when you start the research. Don't try and do it at the last moment. It'll always lead to tears. Formatting, try to get that correct. And we put quite a lot of policies and suggestions in our guide for authors. Other journals, have kind of less prescriptive in terms of what they want. We like a serial comma, so if you don't have a serial comma, we'll reject your article. So we even have instructions in other languages. So we get a lot of submissions from Spanish-speaking countries, Portuguese-speaking countries, Turkish-speaking countries. So we've translated our guidelines into different, just to try to make things easier for our international authorship. So what about the references? So in our field, statements of fact must be supported by peer-reviewed references, and we want those in the introduction. So, that's kind of our guidelines, that we want a comprehensive introduction. We don't want to put the references in the discussion. So we're not looking, there's other information, theses, abstracts, manufacturers' information, personal correspondence, and so on, which may be cited but not in the list of peer-reviewed references. So we don't allow abstracts. And our readership typically wouldn't be able to check a Spanish or a Chinese or a German reference. So we don't allow foreign language references usually. And I've wrote a textbook, so it's okay if they quote my textbook, but other textbooks we try to avoid if at all possible. So in our submission process, the Elsevier system that we use checks the references for accuracy. For most of them, if the textbooks, I don't think they can validate the textbooks, but the journal articles they can validate. So to help us not publish, because with the citation system, if the reference is incorrect, it won't be counted as a citation for that journal. So this, the system kind of depends on accuracy. So this is I'll check them, and the system will check them. And also when something's in press, I'll see if it's been updated before it gets published. And sometimes authors, we use Vancouver style, where you number the references. Sometimes you incorrectly have, reference number 4 and reference number 42 are the same. And when you go to number 42, you should have gone to 4 and repeated that. So I have a system with macros and things, so I can search for that. But obviously, it's better if the author fixes that originally. So this is an example where the same, so number 4 and number 34 were the same reference, so that that's an incorrect. For the author should have spotted that, but fortunately I spotted that, so we didn't publish it like that. Okay, I'll finish up on plagiarism. This is a kind of a huge aspect of academic publishing. So we have built-in software within the process that I use with Elsevier's software that will check for similarities. So it's not 100% reliable, but it's pretty reliable that I pick out problems with cut and paste. So when you cut and paste, the references have to be accurate. So the easiest way to do that is to take a reliable database like PubMed and cut and paste out of that and then convert it into the format that your particular journal is using. Be careful of the order of references. So that's plagiarism if the order of references in your article is the same as some other article, that has first 10 references are the same as some other author's article. That's plagiarism. So just be real careful, that you don't get tripped up that way. Don't cut and paste anything else. That's even from your own work. We have, issues with what's called self-plagiarism when it's methods and materials from a similar study that you've done previously. The problem I have in accepting that, first of all, that previous study might have been published in another journal that owns the copyright. So when you submit an article, you assign copyright to the company that publishes that article. So you don't own the copyright for that wording, for those methods and materials. So that could get me into trouble. The other thing is, although it's your work and your lab, but all the authors are not going to be the same. So they may be different grad students or whatever on that first paper. And in theory, someone could say, well, I wrote all that, and now they're publishing it again under their name. And, although the senior people might be the same, not every author will be the same. So the safest way is to, just refer to the earlier article and then summarize the methods rather than cut and paste. So we use Crosscheck, which is the Elsevier's version of Authenticate, and we catch people with problems every single day. So 1,000 submissions, tons of those have problems with similarity that need to be fixed or need to be rejected. So when I'm an author on a paper and the other authors on that paper, I'll always submit that text to Authenticate or to a similar plagiarism software, because it's really embarrassing if it's submitted to a journal and it comes back, you've got problems with cut and paste, you've got similarity plagiarism problems. It's really embarrassing. And it'll happen to you because not every grad student understands that this is not okay. You've got to, it's not okay. We don't think it's okay to have a whole paragraph of text and then just put a reference number after it. That should be in quotes if it has to be word for word, or it should be summarized or paraphrased in most cases. So just be careful. So do purchase or do get hold of plagiarism software. So this is the sort of thing we're clearly not going to publish. I mean, this is just a clear example of someone cut and pasting from one article to another. I guess he had 2 articles and it got to 80% of the content was plagiarized. And here's another one, I guess that was the same article. So the 63% is from one article and 17% is the other. So the introduction was from one article and the discussion, I guess, was from another article. And we wouldn't tell them to fix this. We'd tell them to find another journal. So this is cut up a little bit, different paragraphs, but not cut and paste, don't do it, not appropriate. And then we get into problems where I haven't spotted the plagiarism problem. So this was a email I got not that long ago, and it says, I recently read an article in my journal entitled, and blacked a few things out, and in the methodology section, the authors have cut and paste sections of my article without citation. This is considered plagiarism and needs to be addressed. So, and I looked, and the number on Authenticate wasn't high. It was really, they just cut and paste this one paragraph, but I should have spotted it. I didn't. It should have been fixed with the submission. So we published in errata, and the authors would like to add 2 more references that were omitted. And it's bad to have an errata attached to your article, but it's not like career-ending. There are things that are worse than an errata to have. This is retracted. So the last thing you want with your work is retracted. I mean, this is, you're not find it easy to get to be a emeritus prof in academics, I think, if you have too many retracted articles. This isn't our journal, but this, it'll show up in PubMed and so on as a retracted article for whatever reasons, and usually it's plagiarism. This is the only one that we've published that was retracted. So this was in May of 2004, so it's now 12 years ago. This actually cost us a lot of money in terms of legal fees. It was a huge deal, and this is why we started plagiarism checking every single article. And initially, Authenticate didn't exist. We had different softwares that weren't quite as good. But basically, this individual had submitted a published article from some obscure journal that someone else had written as their work. And fortunately for the academic community, a colleague of the original author read this and thought this was pretty similar, and kind of looked in and wrote letters, and it was clear that this was plagiarized work, and this is a retracted article. So this is what we published in our journal. Because it was reprinted without authorization, and this is absolute career killer. So clearly, the authors knew what they were doing and shouldn't have done it. There was a very nice article by the then editor and the manager of editorial council, who kind of set out some of these aspects of academic publication, which is still very relevant. I mean, this was published after this particular case, but we're looking to update this for kind of with the contemporary world. Okay, let me. This was the dilemma I mentioned a little earlier, because even if you're a native speaker, you may not be the world's greatest writer. So. Something comes in, is it good enough to judge the science, but it's pretty difficult to follow? Usually I'd send that to reviewers. If it's not good enough, then the authors need to get English help. And then this is, if they still can't get it fixed, this will be rejected. The problem that the authors are going to have is that the reviewers, they're not going to read word by word and just try to get through something that's very hard to read. They want to have something that they can assess relatively fast, because they're all volunteers. These leaders in the field, they get a lot of articles from all the different journals to review. So they probably aren't going to spend a huge amount of time on your article if it's not fairly accessible to them. I don't want to reject good science. I don't want to be the guy that rejects, like, Crick and Watson's article. That's not good for editors. So hopefully you kind of figure out, is the science in there really, really good? So in which case I'll do whatever it takes to get that into a publishable field. But if it's so-so, and we probably could live without this article, then then this will be a reject because the English isn't good enough. So all the journals that you're interested in publishing in are peer-reviewed journals, which means that I have to, as editor, I've got to find a peer reviewer for that. In our system, we do anonymous. Some journals do open peer review. There's sort of different approaches to peer review. But it's hard, from our point of view, to find qualified people that are willing to spend the time. So it's helpful when you submit your article to help the journal, to help the editor, kind of filter that into the correct peer review group. Because I'm not an expert on whatever you're writing about. I'm expert in some things, but a lot of things that we publish on, I really don't know that much about. So we have categories. Most journals have categories in terms or keywords that you assign to your articles. Please spend time to accurately reflect the content of your article with those categories, because I use those to find the experts in that field. And if you put general clinical science or something like that, it's no help whatsoever. Some journals ask for reviewer suggestions. We don't. Usually you exclude people, obviously the same institution, the same city, and They've also been scandals with peer review. This is a sad world where basically authors were reviewing their own manuscripts by starting sort of email addresses, Gmail or Yahoo addresses of famous people in the field. So it looked like it was Prof. So-and-so because the email address was similar, but in fact it was them. And then they signed up that person with their email address as a peer reviewer, and then they got the thing sent to themselves. So that's why Elsevier kind of consolidated all the reviewers for all the journals across the whole of, they have over 2,000 journals with a single email address. So you can't have a person with two profiles within the whole of the Elsevier system, just to try to make sure that every peer reviewer is in fact who they say they are. So that kind of thing is an issue. Okay, you get a review. What do you do? It might, typically, if they tell you to revise, if you do what they tell you, you'll get accepted. That's been my experience. I've published over the years. First thing I would do is sleep on it. Don't send off that email telling the editor what an idiot he is or she is, and why you've just rejected the next Crick and Watson article for your journal. Usually, if peer reviewers don't understand, the authors often say that. They just totally misunderstood. Well, maybe the language wasn't explained well enough in the manuscript. So fix that, make it better. And, maybe it has to go to another journal, but, we can certainly improve our manuscript after the first peer review. But usually, if you do as you're told, if possible. Sometimes they'll tell you to double the number of subjects and so on, and that's difficult to achieve, obviously, with your budgets and so on. So these things can often be dealt with in the discussion. So when they have a critique that you can't address because it costs too much money, or you can't re-randomize, or your IRB won't allow, or whatever it is, usually that's a critique, and part of the discussion is going to be a critique. So that's hopefully interesting information. I'm sorry if I was jet-lagged at all, but I certainly answer any questions via email, or if you have questions before lunch, that's good too. Thank you.